Sorry, been getting emotional trying to do this. Here's my personal cultural presentation. Um, as I did this, it became apparent to me I didn't really know my grandparents that well, my great grandparents at all. Don't know why it's making me so emotional. I'm pausing again. I don't know how this is even gonna turn out, but these are my grandparents from left to right. That's OE, Oscar Eugene Stevenson. My grandma Pat, she is my only remaining grandparent that's still alive, Grandpa Doug, and then Grandma Lori. We don't know much about, or at least me and my dad and my mom didn't know much about um, our descent, other than it was a German descent. They knew their grandparents a little bit, but it's kind of a similar thing where they were pretty old when my parents got around to the age of like 15 or 16, and they passed away around the age of like 16, 17 for both my parents. So they never really got to know their grandparents that well, and I feel the same way. I'm the youngest in my family, and 3 out of 4 passed away by the time I was 17. It was pretty sad. I wish I got to know them better, but I have heard pretty cool stories about them. I knew that my grandpa grew up in Council Groves, which isn't far away from here in Manhattan, so that's kind of cool. My grandma grew up in Emporia. That's where they ended up living and starting their family. And then my grandparents on my mother's side both grew up and lived in Cedar Rapids. They were both second generation farmers, and they started their farm of their own. Pretty awesome. Going over to my mom's side a little closer. Like I said, second generation farmers. They were both Catholic, raised Catholic, and then they ended up turning Lutheran, and that influenced a lot of my religious upbringing. I'll mention later that my dad was raised Catholic too. Um, he kind of had a falling out with religion, so my mom's side is a little more influenced, or was a little more influenced in their decision to raise us Lutheran growing up. Went to private school and everything, so kind of have my grandma and my grandpa to thank for that. They lived pretty simple lives. They had 2 kids, my mom and my uncle. My uncle was actually adopted. They adopted him when my mom was 5, I believe. And then they have 5 blood grandkids, and now they have, or they would have had, um, 5 great grandkids. So pretty simple couple, pretty simple family. We'd go up and see them in Iowa. Wasn't the most exciting trip, and I honestly kind of dreaded it every time we went. But we did also take trips to a lake in Wisconsin. They would rent out a cabin, and we'd stay there, a couple cabins, and we'd stay there. My grandpa would drive us on the boat. We'd go tubing, we'd go water skiing and fishing, and it was actually really fun. Um, my dad got pretty close to my great grandpa through fishing trips with him and my dad's father. So both my grandparents and my dad, and I forget who else went with them. I think it was my uncle, but I have a lot of uncles, so I don't know why they didn't all go. Um, but that's some of his favorite moments with them. So I loved hearing those stories. Over on my dad's side, a pretty different upbringing. My grandpa Gene was at once like the second richest man in Kansas, and that was due to he was kind of an entrepreneur all along, and early on he got involved in the oil industry. Um, was I don't really know the terms, but he was involved with oil in Kansas, Oklahoma, and was able to get quite a bit of income from that. He owned a lot of restaurants. My dad told the story how in Emporia there was like no good Mexican restaurants, and my grandpa loved Mexican food, so he uh, bought some land and built a Mexican restaurant. Um, he also did things like he hosted, let's supposed to say golf tournaments. It says gold tournaments, golf tournaments down in this um, place called Shangri-La in Oklahoma, really nice resort. My dad said there was Chiefs players at the time there. There was a bunch of other rich people. My dad and my uncles would work the tournament and everything, the four of them, and they would walk away with like $1,000 in tips and everything just because of the high class people that were there. So it's pretty different from my mom's side. Um, Eventually, he ended up getting pushed out of the oil industry by bigger players, which was kind of common. And they ended up losing a majority of their money, and they settled down in Overland Park after all of my dad's siblings grew up and moved out. So um, I think that's just kind of cool to see the contrast between my mom and my dad. They were both raised in small towns. My mom was in Cedar Rapids. My dad was in Iowa or Emporia. Um, my dad grew up, knowing wealth in a different way than my mom did. Farmers, are actually pretty wealthy, but they're not like fluidly wealthy. My dad was pretty wealthy. They both grew up pretty religious. Um, I think it was almost to a fault. My dad grew up and went to a school where he had like nuns teaching him and would like beat people with rulers if they were misbehaving in class, and then you couldn't go home and complain to your mom because then she would beat you for misbehaving in class. So religion was kind of a presence in both of their lives, but it wasn't something they enjoyed, I don't think. My mom definitely had a better relationship with religion. My dad, coming out of childhood, was probably closer to atheist than he was Catholic. Um, he also grew up um, with that wealth, so he was familiar with drinking. He had a bunch of DUIs. He was actually in jail for a week or so until my grandpa pulled him out, paid bail, and he's gone to rehab and everything. So he's kind of experienced a lot. He's lived a lot of different lives. As times have changed, he's had to change with it, and eventually they both settled down in Kansas City, and they both became respiratory therapists. Um, they actually met each other at the same hospital after they both were already divorced once. So it's kind of a cute story, but they both had a lot of challenges getting there. Divorce, my dad with all of his alcohol issues and drug issues. And he also says my mom partied a lot, but she never got in trouble. So it seems like too much information to be telling classmates, honestly. Pretty much said all this, but my dad's taught me a lot through what he's gone through, those stories that he's able to tell. Um, Honestly, if anything, they show how times have changed, just how people approach issues like alcoholism and everything, or maybe was where it's prevalent. Back then, it was like rich people were probably alcoholics, but nowadays it's a lot different, I'd say. Um, he also talks about how growing up, his dad maybe wasn't, he didn't really think his dad showed love to him or his siblings. And that's something that he really wanted to do better when he raised us, and he really has. He also mentioned how he's noticed, he noticed towards the end of my grandpa's life that he realized like how much he was missing out on loving his kids. Yeah. My mom, growing up on the farm, she's really hardworking. She's instilled that in a lot of she's instilled a lot of that in us. I have five siblings. All five are hers. Two of them are my half siblings, technically, so they're not my dad's kids, but they are my dad's kids. He loves them too. I think now my mom has learned how to relax a little bit better. She used to be really independent and would be working all the time. But now she's learned how to relax. And I think maybe that's something that came from growing up in a farming family, pretty strict. Um, and now she can kind of just kick back and relax and appreciate family. I hope she likes a family because she made a lot of kids. So she has a few great grandkids of her own, and she really loves family. So that's pretty awesome to see both of them and how they've changed and how their um, cultural upbringing and their family has influenced how they've raised us. And it really shows me like what I want to put onto my family as well.